We're combining all the best old school wisdom with all the top new school methods to bring you the optimal way to coach and play the great game of baseball. This is the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass with Coach Bo.
Welcome everybody, Coach Bo here. We're here for our weekly episode of the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass, the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, where the discussion revolves around better coaching, better baseball. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I'm going to make it worth your while. Let's get right into it. I just got home from a nice drive through the countryside out here in Boise. I drove through Star and we came through Middleton. Anybody familiar with the Treasure Valley knows what I'm talking about. And as beautiful as the drive was, and it's just a beautiful day, the best part of the entire drive was driving through Star, Idaho, and looking over at the Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen always catches my eye ever since my childhood and my youth, spending all my summers in Butte, Montana, and the Dairy Queen down the street from my grandma's house. And I looked over at the Dairy Queen. I pointed it out to my wife. I said, ooh, blizzard time. And as we got closer and we're passing the Dairy Queen, I saw a Little League team with the coaches and everybody in their uniforms walking into the Dairy Queen, and it was awesome. And these kids were on cloud nine. Whether they won or lost, it probably doesn't matter. These kids were excited. They were excited to go to Dairy Queen, get a burger, and definitely get themselves a sundae or a banana split or a blizzard. And that was cool. All uniformed up, big smiles on their face, got their baseball hats on, their uniforms on. That was really cool to see. And as a coach of a team, it's not a bad idea to frequently invite or suggest that the team get together after a game, maybe even cut a practice a little bit short. When I say frequently, maybe once a month. After one of the games, once a month, the team goes out after the game and they hang out. They hang out off the field. It's an easy way to help build better rapport. Kids like it. They're usually hungry after a game. You can get some pizza, and with a little planning, a little strategy, you probably can make it a nice, enjoyable event. It doesn't have to be a long thing. It could just be an hour and a half. It could be at the most, maybe 2 hours is plenty. So if you had a game at 1 o'clock, you're done at 3 o'clock. You keep that post-game talk real short. You should always be keeping that short, right? Kids tune out. I don't know if you know this. I'm telling you now, the kids tune out. Give them like 3 minutes and they're gone. 3 minutes is about all you got, especially youth coaches. If you're lucky, you got a really quality, disciplined high school program, you're lucky at 5 minutes to 6 minutes. College, you're lucky at about 7 or 8. I know I'm generalizing here, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb to follow. So don't think you're the coach that you're more interesting than all the other things they've heard in their life, and they're just sitting there dying to hear everything you have to say. No, they've checked out. So get your speech, your post-game compliments out, your post-game synopsis of what they need to, your team needs to work on to get better. A couple minutes and boom, off to the pizza parlor or off to a place where they can get together, get some food, and they can go from being teammates and players to being friends and people outside or off the field. And I think that's just an easy strategy, something that can help teams. It's not going to solidify a team culture if it's already eroded or it's already divisive. It's not going to just solidify. It's a part of the process. Everybody needs to eat. Kids like it. You tag it on to the day. So you start the game at 1 o'clock, you're done at 3, you go till 5. You play a game, you have a nice pizza party afterwards, and it still doesn't take up more than about a third of your day. So that was really cool to see those kids and the smiles on their face as they just played baseball with their uniforms on, and they were going in to get that Reese's peanut butter blizzard, or my second favorite, the Butterfinger blizzard. Butterfingers, I'm not a big fan of Butterfingers just by themselves, but you put them in a blizzard, oh my, delicious. And some of you right now are like, yo, Coach Bo, a couple episodes ago, you were talking about a post-game meal that's healthy. I think you said almonds, Coach Bo, and blueberries. Yeah, I did. But hey, you know what? If you try to be perfect, they call it the 80-20 I call it the 80-20 podcast because 80% of the time, your post-game meals should be pretty good. And 20% of the time, bring on the Sundays. And now for a quick review of episode 68. We talked about in episode 68 last week, the pros and cons of shortening the arm path. Just avoid the extremes. You're going to see this in the major leagues. It's going to be something that's talked about a lot on your TV or whatnot. You're going to see this as coaches. And again, youth coaching is, you got to be careful as a youth coach, even a high school coach, listening too much to these professional coaches and even the college coaches, because that's a completely different level. The context is hugely important to keep in mind here. They are working with players that are fine tuning their skills. They also have an abundance of time for the most part. Now, they may say they don't, but they have a lot more time than a youth coach, far more time than a youth coach to work with their players. And also the skills at that level are fine tuning. So you talk about spin rate. I would never even bring up spin rate to a 12-year-old ever. I wouldn't bring it up to a youth. I wouldn't talk about any of that stuff that 99% of these pro coaches and pro trainers that they talk about, because there's a huge difference, in my opinion, between what they should be working on, that 1%, that extra 2% that's going to get them over the top, that extra 5%, compared to what youth players and youth coaches should be focusing on. So we talked about shortening the arm path. Be careful of that. You're going to hear that. And that's something that they're talking about with the pitching. I think a shorter arm path can be advantageous for some pitchers, a shorter arm action in the back. Basically, as they take it out of their glove, do they really reach far back? I think some pitchers get long. Some pitchers are going way too far the other way. I talked about Joe Kelly being an extreme version of that. My point here is twofold. Don't get caught up by all this fancy jargon and coaching pointers that professional and college coaches give. Be very careful of this. Be very careful. I enjoy listening to it. Sounds great. And if I was working with professional players, it would be great. And if I was working with college level players, it would be great. Or high level high school players that are, guys that are definitely looking for that extra 1, 2, 3, 5%. But it's going to lead youth coaches getting on the trivial many and not the vital few. Again, the 80-20 principle talks about the trivial many of things that you can do that are going to get you very limited and smaller results versus the vital few things that you can do out there on the practice field, out there in a training session that are going to be big needle movers that are going to get you almost all of your results. Most of these professional players and college players have got or have achieved most of those results, so they don't need to build all the foundational parts and all the fundamentals. Sure, they need to continue fine-tuning those, but they're on to other things too. They're stacking their skills rather than getting that foundation. They're building the penthouse right now. Youth baseball players, youth baseball coaches should be building that foundation. They should be putting the concrete in, and at most, you're framing, drywalling, and painting that house. You're not putting chandeliers on. That's not what youth coaches should go chase, the shiny objects. They shouldn't be trying to build up the penthouse. They should be building the foundation and then working from there. We also talked in episode 68, a tip on helping coaches give praise more consistently, making a better habit of it by having a team roster, maybe small font, print it out, and you cross off the names or put a check next to the names as you give them praise. Or you could have somebody, maybe a parent that's off to the side, listening in and just checking it off for you. It's data, it's information that helps drive the team culture. I know we talk about data as a statistic in terms of like sabermetrics and on-base percentage plus slugging and WAR and all this and weighted runs created plus and FIP. But one thing that I think is important is we also try to quantify how well we are at building team culture. And I think by giving praise consistently, that's really big. And so if you have the team roster out there, you can make sure like, hey, at the end of practice, did I give everybody at least one piece of genuine praise? One piece of genuine praise. And you can give more, but just at least one to everybody. And of course, it's never going to be equal across the board, but it would be nice if in a 2-hour practice and you have 12 players or 14 players, you can find a way to get praise, genuine praise, at least once to each of your players. In fact, you could probably get that praise done before the first 30 minutes to half your team if you're looking for the good. And we talked about this. Look for the good. It'll be there. Look for the good. Don't look for the bad. I'm not saying you ignore rule breakers by any means. And if you've listened to this podcast, my stance on rules and standards. My stance on standards is you don't break them. You enforce. It's not what you say you're going to have as a rule. It's what you tolerate. And if you're going to say this is a rule, we're going to hustle. And if a player does not hustle, does not go full speed or at least 95% speed, boom, you better enforce it right then and there with that player, whether that means pulling him out of the game or getting that team on the line, down the foul line, if it's during practice and bear crawl on the team. But when it comes to giving praise and seeing the praise, most of us aren't as well conditioned, or our paradigm doesn't allow us to see the good as much as we do the rule breakers. You see players that aren't doing the right thing. That stands out a little more naturally, I guess. I don't know why it is. I haven't really broken that down, but we see the mistakes a lot more vividly, it seems like, or they're more apparent than those actions or things that players do that we could praise them for and give them genuine praise for. So give them more genuine praise and chart it. See how you're doing. In part 3 of last week, we talked about how to better optimize your pitching lineup, your pitching staff for game action. Go back. There was about 4 suggestions, 4 strategies to better optimizing your pitching lineup. And in part 4 of last week's episode 68, we talked about a simple practice tip that can get you about 15 to 30 more minutes of field time. And that being move your start time up 15 minutes or 30 minutes before your slotted field time. Again, this goes for those teams that are sharing fields and have a designated field time during the week that they have practice scheduled for. So if your team has Tuesday night practice scheduled from 5 to 7, have your players there at 4:45 ready to go. Get the dynamic warm-up ready to go, or done with, I should say, so they're ready to go right right into the field work once the field opens up and the team before them gets off or before it opens up and they have access to it. It was more of a tip for teams that don't have a field at their disposal for whatever time period they want or whatever time frame they want. So if you're squeezed into a field time slot, you have an hour and a half, you got 90 minutes here, or even batting practice. This is something that happens, and I didn't mention this last week. When it comes to batting practice or cage time, a lot of times teams are slotted in to a certain cage time, or we have the batting cages from this slot to this slot from 7 to 8. Your players should be ready to go full swings at 7 o'clock. They should have done tee work. They should have done soft toss. They should have done whatever you need to do to get those swings dialed in before that 1 hour time slot. Or if you have the cages for 2 hours, they should be ready to go by the time they get into that cage, because once you're in the cage, that's valuable time and you don't want to waste it by warming up, getting your swings and everything like that ready to go. So as a coach of a youth team where you're sharing facilities and whatnot, I highly recommend that you are always looking for open areas on the field, open fields that aren't being used, a soccer field, a football field that you can use, or space around a batting cage or outside of a facility that you can go through a warm-up routine or whatever things you need to do so you're ready to go when the clock strikes whatever time your practice starts. All right. Before I get into part one, I want to thank all of you coaches that have volunteered your time, that are putting your time out there to help our youth. Thank you all for what you do. And most of you can say that there was a coach along the way that had a big impact on you. And if there wasn't, you need to be the coach that leaves a big impact. Be a positive impact on these young people so they're better human beings and not just better prepared for high school baseball or college baseball or a scholarship or getting drafted. That's cool and that's awesome. And I'm not saying you should ignore that, but first and foremost, thank you for all going out there with the mindset of making them better people. And we talk about it on this podcast, how to do that. We talk about the ingredients, the recipe, the plan to make these players better people. It starts with team culture, starts with discipline. It also starts with confidence, and then it builds into efficient and quality practices. And they see how they need to be like a microcosm of life. They see how these things they're learning out on the baseball field can transfer to the rest of their life. Thank you, all of you coaches, for what you're doing, playing your part, and just planting that seed of positivity, planting that seed of discipline, planting that seed of hustle, planting a seed of players understanding how to deal with failure or learning to start dealing with failure better. And so it can grow and be a nice, strong trunk, as in a tree trunk, a nice, strong trunk core. So as they get older and branch out, those branches are held to something firm and they can branch out and grow and expand and grow up. But those roots and that trunk are much stronger than they would have been because of what you're doing with them now as a coach. Be a good leader, be a good example, and thank you, all of you coaches. All right, part one of this episode. Here's a simple strategy, a simple tip, a simple thing you can do with your catchers to improve your pitcher's accuracy. Now, when I say accuracy, this is count-dependent accuracy. What I mean by that, we all know that certain counts dictate or should dictate where we are throwing the pitch. Again, this is assuming that the pitcher is going to hit the target, which is not always the case by any means, but it doesn't mean you should not have your catcher set up with a default setup depending on the count. For example, if it's 0-0, first pitch, they shouldn't be expanded off the plate. They should not be necessarily right down the middle of the plate. Maybe for 8U, 7U, 9U, maybe set up right down the middle. But if you have pitchers that have somewhat decent accuracy, when it's 0-0 first pitch, you're not going to be too far off the plate. Maybe you're not down the middle, you're outer third, inner third. And then if you get to 0-2, your catcher should be, what I would recommend is glove is just off the plate. There shouldn't be a gap between the plate and the glove, but the glove should be, the edge of the glove closest to the plate should be lined up over the edge of the plate. So that would be like 0-2. So what you're going to do with your catchers is you're going to have them set up. Maybe you can line them all up behind throwdown plates, or if you have bullpens that have multiple plates, have them line up and you run them through. Say, when it's first pitch, you get this fastball here, fastball there, we are going to set up here. So like outer third of the plate. If it's a breaking ball early in the count, you might have them set up right down the middle, trying to get a strike early on. And then you tell them if we're slightly ahead in the count, 0-1 or 1-2, 1 ball, 2 strikes, then we're going to set up with our glove splitting the outer corner of the plate. So half of our glove is over the plate, half is off the plate. And then you get to 0-2 and you have the catcher set up with their glove right on the outside of the plate's edge. So you set your catchers with a default setup position dependent on the count. If it's first pitch, they're not getting too crazy and expanding. If it's 0-2, they will expand to this spot. And you tell them them what you think is best depending on your level and your pitcher's control. I recommend having 4 default setup spots. Down the middle, their glove is right down the middle. The middle of their glove splits the middle of the plate. Then I would have outer third, so outer thirds of the plate, where their glove is almost entirely over the plate, but on the outer half, you could say. So now it's on the half, the outer half or the inner half. So now they're using the half or the third of the plate. And then from there, moving out, depending on the favor of the count, if it's more in the pitcher's favor, then you're going to split the edge of the plate with the middle of the catcher's glove. And then to the furthest, which would be like your 0-2, or maybe even a 1-2 situation where there's an empty base, like first base is open and it's a really good hitter up, you would have them, the catcher that is, have their glove off the plate. And not too far, depending on the umpire, it depends on how far you go. Most umpires, you're going to have the glove just off. So just the entire glove is just off the outside of the plate. And that could be to either side, obviously dependent on the hitter's handedness. So you could call this area 0, area 1, area 2, area 3, or you could call it location 0, etc., or zone 0, 1, 2, 3. Or you could just keep it even more simple and just have the catcher look over at you and just remind him like, hey, area this, area 2. Now, as you get more advanced, you don't want to give away where you're positioning the players, but it's not a secret. Now, I know a lot of you catching gurus out there thinking, well, I want to have a late setup. That's cool, but I think it's better to be a little early when you're in the youth baseball world and worry about getting cute and worry about hiding the locations a little more as you get older. So I think having those locations as a default setting for your catchers can help improve the pitcher's accuracy when it comes to the count. Of course, the pitcher has to execute the pitch. It doesn't matter what the catcher's doing at the end of the day if the pitcher is not optimizing the delivery, or at least an efficient, effective delivery and making quality pitches. It doesn't really matter what the catcher's doing, but it doesn't hurt to have the catcher setting up in a good position. And that position, that location, that area, that zone is going to be dependent on the count leverage, what's called count leverage, or who's it in favor of? Is it in favor of the pitcher or the hitter, etc.? You all know these counts. You can do the math on these. You guys have all, if you're listening to this podcast, you understand baseball enough to understand count leverage. Now utilize that leverage to set up your catcher. And so it would be great if you as a coach did not have to tell them where to, hey, you got to move out a little. Hey, it's 2-0-2. Hey, catcher, move off. And you're telling them like you're waving them off the plate. They should know automatic default. I'm going here. I'm a huge fan of having default setups when it comes to a lot of things like defensive placement or catching setup. I'm a big fan of having default setups and then moving and adjusting from there. So you have a default position like on defense. I have a default setup for all left-handed hitters, all right-handed hitters, and then you adjust according to A, scouting report, B, how that hitter is hitting off that pitcher that day or the pitcher's velocity that day that you have on the mound. So you have a default setup and then you adjust from the default, a baseline setup. So you play the percentages and then you adjust those percentages based off the individual hitter when it comes to the defensive placement. But I think for a catching setup and location, I think you keep it real simple. 0, 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. And they know where they should set up. I know it sounds like a matter of inches, but baseball is a game of inches. And a pitch that is 3 inches further out, maybe on the edge of the plate versus 3 inches over the plate, could be the difference between a strikeout or a weak ground ball or a ball that's driven the other way or turned on and launched out into the parking lot. So go work with your catchers on having this default setup. This should be default so you don't have to worry about it during the game. That's ideal. You have these default setups. You can always, hey, if it's a really weak hitter up there and there's 2 outs and this hitter can't hit, so say there's 2 outs, you got the opposing hitter up there that couldn't hit water if he fell out of the SS Minnow out in the middle of the Pacific, and you're like, hey, we want to get out, let's just go right after him. You may tell the catcher, hey, area 0 or area 1 when it's 0-2. All right, you can always adjust it, but have the default setting be set and then you adjust it from there. So you might get more aggressive and just say, hey, we're going to pipe it down the middle and let this guy make this guy swing the bat. So we're not, working around and walking the number 9 hitter that couldn't really hit anyways. And also you might get a hitter up there like the young Barry Bonds in your area and you're like, well, we got a base open here. And I know usually early in the count, we're not getting too far onto the edges, but hey, we're going to slide out. We might go area 3 first pitch. We might go area 3 every pitch. And so you can adjust it, but you can see there is some flexibility. I'm a big fan of having default settings and default setups and then adjusting when it's needed. It's like us as adults having routines. It's great to have routines, but if you're so rigid, you have no flexibility, no spontaneity, that's not good either. You got to be able to go out, oh, hey, somebody calls you up, hey, you got to have some flexibility and you got to be able to pivot a little bit and move with that. But having routines as a base setup in life is great. So have your routines, but have some flexibility, be able to pivot. So that's what I like. I really like coaching that way. And I think living that way, again, you could say 80% of the time you stick to your routine, you stick to this setting, but 20% of the time, give or take, it's not an exact ratio, that 80-20 rule is coming up again. The 80-20 principle kind of comes up everywhere in life. It's like nutrition, right? 80% of the time you should eat really healthy. 20% of the time, eat whatever. And so to wrap that one up, part one, you got a strategy which will help improve their results as a pitcher because you're going to be throwing to the location that best suits the leverage in the count and the hitter that they're going against. Part two here, I got a book recommendation. Speaking of the 80-20 principle, the guy who made it, Richard Koch, is the author, the guy who brought the 80-20 principle to like the forefront in contemporary time. And Richard Koch has a new book out. And again, I'm not affiliated with Richard Koch. I surely don't get compensation for plugging his book here, but I know that his 80-20 principle and the mindset, the paradigm that Richard Koch has is really good. Sure, there's so many good books that we can read out there or listen on audiobook to that are going to make us more successful people, better people in all facets of our life. But I think Richard Koch is one of those at the top that has a really good understanding of the 80-20 mindset, understanding what the big needle movers are in life and how to find those big needle movers, whether they're at your job, your business, or at the baseball field during practice, understanding that you have to look at it like everything is not going to yield equal results or equal production. There are things that you do when you go out to the baseball field as a coach with your team that are going to move the needle more than others and some a lot more than others. And it's important to understand that or inherently you're going to waste a lot of productive time. So his new book that came out, it's a good one. It's called Unreasonable Success and How to Achieve It. It's called Unreasonable Success and How to Achieve It. The nice thing about Richard Koch's books, you can use this in everything in life. That's what's great. You can use it with your workout routine. You can use it around the house. You can use it with taking care of your yard. You can definitely use it in any business, anywhere. I love these principles that are applicable to everything in life because, of course, then everybody can use them and they can use them throughout the day, no matter what they're doing. So his book, Unreasonable Success, I highly recommend reading at least the 80-20 principle, if not also Unreasonable Success. He wrote another book. He co-authored another book called Simplify. He's written different 80-20 books. He's written beyond the 80-20 principle. He has also written the book called the 80-20 Manager. I think that's a good one. The 80-20 Manager. Sounds like baseball, right? And I promise you, you're going to, if you apply what you learn in those books to your personal life, your family life, your business, your job, if you're an employee, you run your own business, doesn't matter. If you apply those to those areas, you're going to see growth and improvement. And of course, out there on the baseball field or any coaching venture you have, it's going to be a big deal. So if you haven't already, at a minimum, go listen to the audiobooks, Richard Koch. Start with the 80-20 principle, 80-20 manager, and then work from there. All right, now for part three, here we go. Last week we touched on this. I said I was going to talk about it this week. Avoid the extremes. So here are a couple examples. I'm going to give you some examples of avoiding the extremes. We know in life, it's not good to be on the extremes. And we could go on and on about the extremes in life, right? The extremes, it's like exercising. You should probably exercise 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, but you probably shouldn't be out there busting 40-mile runs every other day or bike riding 100 miles a day. With that said, I don't think right down the middle is the answer. Everybody talks about avoiding extremes and then meeting in the middle. Let's avoid. We don't want to be on either extreme. You hear this in politics a lot. You don't want to be on either extreme. And then you hear a lot of people say, if we just meet in the middle, like inherently the middle is the best place, right? It's logically flawed big time, just meeting in the middle, because now you're saying that both ends of both points on each end are exactly where they should be on each end. And that's just not the case. So when it comes to baseball, we don't. And you hear the title, you hear the intro. I wrote the intro to this podcast because I wanted the message to mean something. Now, Donald, I had Donald put it together. Donald, that's his voice at the beginning and his voice at the end. And man, like I've said before, there's a reason I didn't do the voiceover because his voice is much better than mine. But I wrote those words because it said, we don't want to be all tied to the old school and all tied to the new school. We want to blend them together. Now, it's not always going to be a 50-50 blend. It shouldn't be a 50-50 blend. There are definitely items when it comes to old school baseball that I would favor more and be more towards old school mindset and philosophy and strategy. And there are some things I would be a little more closer to the new school approach. When I say old school, new school, I mean those extremes of those versions. For example, I don't use batting average. I wouldn't use that statistic. There are massive flaws when it comes to batting average. The two most obvious flaws, which are massive flaws, batting average doesn't calculate walks. So inherently doesn't calculate getting on base, some of those parts of getting on base, like getting hit by a pitch or a walk. And for me, that's a non-starter. If you don't factor in walks, I don't want that stat. stat. Get it out of there because I value walks. Do I want hitters going up there looking to walk? No. I want hitters that go up there and respect and are cool with getting a walk and letting the next guy do their damage if the pitcher doesn't give them quality pitches or if the pitcher isn't throwing things over the plate. But using a stat that doesn't even incorporate walks into how it's quantifying and assessing the hitter's productivity, throw it out. Interestingly enough, Branch Rickey sniffed this out 80 years ago. That and along with also getting players like Jackie Robinson in the league. And now the next big flaw with batting average, not to get too far down the batting average rabbit hole, but it all hits are equal. All hits are equal. So if you get a shimp, weak hit, wet newspaper single that barely falls in, you might even have a broken bat if you're using a wood bat. It falls in over the second baseman's head. That is quantified with the same respect, the same quantification, or I should say the same value as a line drive home run that goes over the fence by 15 feet. And then another part of the old school baseball that I think we need to avoid the extremes are, here's two extremes. There are teams that there are college level teams at the Division I level that still bunt every time the book tells them to bunt. And then there are teams, there are organizations, there are people out there, I see them on Twitter talking, that say don't bunt at all. And this is, to me, this is a big flaw in thinking. I absolutely think we should be bunting. Should we be bunting as much as they did in old school baseball, the sacrifice bunts? No, I wouldn't. The math doesn't support it. Statistics don't support it. Even the math for youth baseball and high school baseball don't necessarily support that. I'm a big fan of drag bunts. Huge fan. In fact, that's a default setting I have with my teams. If the third baseman is playing back, not paying attention, playing deep, or just he's clueless or saying, hey, bunt on me, then we're going to drag bunt. Especially if that pitcher is falling off to one side or just an unathletic pitcher, we're going to bunt. We're going to drag bunt. It's a default. There's a drag bunt. He's giving you a hit. But I wouldn't sacrifice bunt unless it were a safety squeeze or at the very end of the game against Mariano Rivera to move a runner into scoring position. If those situations come up, a safety squeeze, specifically with first and third, runners at first and third, and one out. Now, if you think about that situation some more, you'll see where I'm coming at with that. Those are the 3 times I'm bunting. That's it. And that may be 5 bunts a game. It may be 0, but I'm not going up there with we're bunting as often as we can. But I'm also going up there, especially in youth baseball and high school baseball, default setting, drag bunt anytime that third baseman is at this point. If he's 4 or 5 feet behind that bag, or if he's not very athletic, you may dictate that before the game. You have a scouting report on him or the pitcher. And the default setting is if he's here and this is the pitcher or this is a pitcher, it's automatic drag bunt, especially with no strikes, because you can be fine with it, put it down the line. If it goes foul, so what? You got 1 strike. I'm a big fan of the safety squeeze. Go look up safety squeeze. I'm a big fan of the first and third safety squeeze, especially to stay out of that double play. When a first and third situation, you stay out of that double play. Now, at the youth game, you might just steal that runner before you even have your hitter swing. You may likely just steal second and be second and third. And if the pitcher throws a strike, okay, you got 1 strike on the hitter. Or you just tell the hitter, hey, we're stealing. And if it's a pitch, a meatball that you can drive, then you're going to go ahead and crush it, or at least attempt to crush it. That's what they call the run and hit, not the hit and run. Okay, so I just hit on some examples of the extremes. But in baseball, you don't want to be all one way or all the other necessarily. There are a few exceptions to this. If you have a rule, then you should be all in on enforcing that rule. There is no like, oh, that player didn't hustle that time, but I don't feel like enforcing it. You should always enforce your rules. But things like bunting, you just bunt every time the book tells you to bunt, or every time they did growing up, that's when you bunted. No, you have to be able to not necessarily just go to one extreme or the other. Pitching repertoire. I think having just 1 pitch is probably not a great idea unless your name's Mariano Rivera. And I don't think having 17 pitches is a great idea. In fact, I don't think having, for a youth pitcher, more than 3 pitches is a good idea. I think the fastball can play out as 3 or 4 different pitches, inside, outside, elevated, or knee level, middle. But as a pitcher and as a coach of pitchers, you shouldn't rely on just 1 pitch, but you also shouldn't be out there trying to come up with 1,000 different pitches and this, that, and the other. So you avoid the extreme. You don't need 9 pitches in your repertoire. You need a couple good ones, but you probably should go out there with more than 1. Hitters, do you want to be super patient or super aggressive? First off, we've talked about this. My hitting approach, this is probably the thing I'm most up on of anything that I've come up organically with. A lot of the stuff that I share with you, I've taken from the best minds throughout the baseball world, throughout the world, and I've brought it here. But there are some things that in 35 years of baseball, there's a few things that just hit me. I go, this, I've never heard it. I've never seen this. And I study this a lot from a lot of different people, a lot of different areas from all over the country. And I never heard this hitting approach broken down like I've broken it down for you guys on this podcast multiple times. And so if you follow that hitting approach, which I highly recommend you absolutely do, then you're never going to be super patient, all extreme patient or extreme aggressive, because the pitcher is going to, it's not a mindset. It's the pitcher. The pitch is going to dictate whether you drive it, smash it, or you don't swing at it. But with that said, you don't want to be all patient, all aggressive, aggressive and with like things like discipline. You don't want to be all serious all the time, but you also don't want to go out there and act like you're the best buddy of every player and trying to be their best friends. Find that medium. Give praise and then enforce your rules. Give praise, genuine praise, motivate, say something funny from time to time, keep it light, but also know, or should I say, make it always known that you are also going to enforce your rules. So you are somewhere between the extremes. It may be close to one side, it may be closer to the other, it may be down the middle. That'll work itself out as you see fit with your team. Now, as we wrap up this last part of this podcast here, I believe it's more valuable to all of you, awesome listeners, awesome coaches, awesome people, that if I share with you mindsets or the paradigm of coaching in different various ways, and if I share those with you, I believe that's going to go a lot further towards you being a better coach, more confident, more prepared when you step foot out on that field than just piecing together some drills here, this, that, and the other, and kind of giving you a little tool here, giving you a hammer, but giving you the mindset. Giving a hammer to somebody doesn't mean they're ready to build a house. And I sure do share a lot of specific strategies and tips and things like that you can use, but I do really think that, as we talked about in this last part of this podcast, and that is avoiding the extremes with your strategies. All right, now how those strategies look and how they take place out on the field, they're going to vary depending on your fits and needs and things like that. But the mindset is, I'm just not going all one way or the other just because. There's probably somewhere in the middle that's better, but it may, and it usually is not right in the middle. Like I said, for example, if there's a team that bunts every time the book says to bunt, and then there's a team that never bunts, I think there's a place in the middle somewhere there that's going to yield the optimal results. As I get older, that word optimal moves up the list, is moved up the list real quick in terms of words that I like and words that I want to use and words to kind of live by. Optimize. And I think optimizing starts with the mindset. So we hit on that, avoid those extremes. And that'll do it. We're going to wrap it up right there. I'll see you next week, next Tuesday, episode 70. We are going to break down the phrase, be process driven and results oriented. And we're going to break that down as it looks out on the baseball field. But I think this is also a strategy that we can all use everywhere in our life. Process driven, results oriented. Be process driven and results oriented. And until next week, y'all take care of yourself, take care of those families, take care of your health, get some rest, and then take what we talked about here. Take it out to the baseball field. Take it out to the training facility. Take it to the batting cages. Take it with you to the Dairy Queen. Okay, no, maybe not to the Dairy Queen, but bring your wallet so you can buy all the kids some sundaes. But do take this information out there and be a better coach for your players, for the youth, so we can have a better world in 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And you know what? You're not just going to get the world set up to be a better place by helping our youth be better people when they're younger. You're going to find yourself winning a lot more games along the way. This has been Coach Bo. Catch you on the flip side.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.